Hello and welcome to Ronan Horsemanship. We're reaching an important milestone in Melen's starting process with this episode. But before we get to the good news, I need to tell you about the unpleasant surprise that came up during this week's training. If you have been following me for a while, you know that I like to prepare young horses for the bit by getting them used to the feeling of my lead rope in their mouth first. I have a video dedicated to that topic. I'll give you the link in the description. I use a lead rope because it's already a familiar object to the filly. Something she has learned not to fear. It's soft, flexible, and painless. In general, a young horse will play with the rope and show some discomfort, try to spit it out, and that's usually the end of it. This time, however, I got a reaction I had never encountered before. After a few moments, she panicked and backed away. She even went as far as having a very dramatic reaction. A horse doesn't get into that kind of trouble just because of a lead rope. It's clear that I haven't been told everything about her history. Combined with her reaction to being tied, which I talked about in the previous video, I now suspect the use of a twitch or some other form of rough handling. I find it terrible that a horse can be put into that kind of mental state, regardless of the reason. In any case, it's going to take a few extra sessions, but will help her overcome those fears and bad memories. With horses like this, kindness and patience are essential. Aside from that disappointing discovery, everything else went extremely well. In summary, over the course of 3 sessions, she learned to accept me getting on her back from the ground, then later understood leg pressure, and finally we took our very first steps together. A nice little victory. At this stage, I once again focused heavily on desensitizing before moving into exercises that would later serve me under saddle. I spent a lot of time swinging the lead rope around her head and ears so that things like the reins wouldn't surprise her later on. Another key exercise was the lateral flexion. I talked about it often in other videos because it's an essential part of staying safe in the saddle. If you can flex your horse's neck under the right conditions, you can control and stop it in virtually any situation. So I worked her on one side and then the other, teaching her that I wanted her to remain still. The last exercise before mounting was desensitizing her to my movements and weight in the stirrup. With a horse that hasn't experienced trauma, I can usually move a little faster. But with Melen, I prefer to take extra time to make sure she never feels trapped. Finally, once I was in the saddle, the only thing I worked on that day was, once again, lateral flexion. The next day, I tried a new technique to help her overcome that bad habit of pulling back when tied. I tied her without really tying her and looked for the itchy spot until she decided to pull back and realized she was no longer trapped by the rope. There was still some tension, but it was far less violent. The result? She did it twice that day and then stopped. That's good progress. After that, it was time to work on her feet. Once again, she made tremendous progress. She picked up her feet quite easily, stood quietly, shifted her weight appropriately, and generally handled the whole process pretty well. The trust is definitely here. I'll skip over a few clips, as at the beginning of every session, I obviously worked on the groundwork fundamentals. Backing up, lunging, and desensitizing. You know that now. Then I picked up where we had left off the day before. After some lateral flexion from the ground, I climbed back into the saddle and worked lateral flexion again. The goal was to move forward in small increments because I could tell she might become overwhelmed if I pushed too quickly. Later, I dismounted, took the time to pet her, and then got back on. I want her to understand that having me on her back is always temporary, that she's not going to end up with a guy stuck on her back for the rest of her life, which is probably less stressful from her point of view. So I got back on with the goal of getting any kind of movement from her. I wanted the filly to understand that moving from position 3 to position 2 is always followed by leg pressure, and that this is actually a cue to do something. As for the whole position 1, 2, and 3 concept, you'll find a link to the video in the description. Right below the like button, that nice little thumbs up. When leg pressure alone was no longer enough, I began bumping gently with my heels until I got a step forward. Since everything went so well, I decided to walk her all the way to the tack room before unsaddling her. It gave me the opportunity to introduce her to a new environment with people, other horses, cars, and all sorts of things that helped reinforce her desensitization. Finally, the most recent session at the time I'm editing this video went very well, aside from the bead preparation incident I mentioned at the beginning. Once again, I'll spare you the details, you know the routine by now, groundwork fundamentals, lateral flexion, and all the rest. Let's jump straight to the end of the session once I was back in the saddle. This time, you'll notice that I didn't need to bump her with my heels at all. She fully understood what I was asking of her, and we moved forward simply from changing my position in the saddle. There's still work to do on balance, maintaining the walk, and a few other details, but that will come with time. I believe the hardest part of the process is now behind us. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.